Good morning and welcome to our home worship experience. My name is Michael Rogers and I'm our youth pastor, and I'm so thankful that you joined us today. We've got a lot of exciting things planned and we are just really looking forward to worshiping with one another and studying God's Word. We want to connect with you, and we've got resources and ways that we can do that, and so check the links in the description below and find out ways that you can partner with us or that we can partner with you, whether it's through online giving or whether it's through connection cards. Maybe you've got a prayer need or request that you want to pass along. There are ways that we want to be able to do that. And so please check those links. There's something happening this Wednesday night that I want to make you aware of and invite you to be a part of. We've got our senior dinner here on campus. It'll be an outdoor event where we can honor our seniors and their parents, and we're excited about this to kind of help them come to a conclusion for this really, really crazy semester that they've been in. But here's where you come into play. The dinner is 6 to 8, but we want to invite you from 6:30 to 7 to come drive through the driveway of Discovery Park and have a parade so that you can wave at them and call out your congratulations and encouragement and support for them as they sit in the grassy lawn, dining and just enjoying their families and enjoying one another. So again, you are invited from 6:30 to 7 to come drive through and parade and just show your support for them. So having said those things, let's pray together and then we will worship. God, we thank you for your love for us. We thank you, God, for your provision for us. And God, I pray that today, as we study your word and as we sing your praises, God, that you would just encourage us and lead us in the direction that you would have for us. Father, we're so grateful for our faith family, so grateful for those that we can walk through life with. And God, I pray that today will be a monumental day. In Jesus' name, amen.
Well, good morning. Thank you so much for tuning in to our home worship experience this morning. Psalm chapter 118 says to give thanks to the Lord, for he is good and his steadfast love endures forever. So that's what we're going to do this morning. We are going to praise God, declare that he is good and his steadfast love endures forever. So let's worship him together today.
I am holding on to faith, 'cause I know you'll make a way. I don't always understand, and I don't always get to see, but I will believe it, and I will believe it, 'cause you make mountains move, you make giants fall, and you use songs of praise to shake prison walls. And I will speak to my fear, and I will preach to my doubt that you were faithful then, you'll be faithful now. I am standing on your word. my fear, and I will preach to my doubt that you were faithful then, you'll be faithful now. You were faithful then, you'll be faithful now.
Well, welcome to our Emmanuel home worship experience. We're so glad you're joining us and tuning in today. And before we pick up in our teaching for today, I've got an exciting announcement to share. I know many of you guys have been greatly anticipating our return to on-campus worship. We have as well. We've had a team that's been working really hard to kind of work through some of those details, and we have a date, a target date, and we're so excited. And so in the next couple weeks, on June 7th, we will be returning for our first on-campus worship, and it's worship only. There won't be activities for children, but we are going to open three. We're going to have three environments available, and so we're limited in our capacity this first time out for the first couple weeks or the first phase. We're limiting it to one service in multiple venues. And so we're asking for you to help us out by pre-registering. That lets us know the capacity that we're at and what we can handle. And so we're encouraging you to do that. There'll be a link to do that, a registration link or pre-registration link available on Facebook as well as our website. And this week we're going to be rolling out a lot more information, but I just wanted you to get the gist of it this morning. That it's going to be one service, and it is a new service time. It's at 10:30 a.m. And so for this first phase, and that 10:30 service is going to last, that service time is going to continue throughout the summer, but you're going to see that it's part of a much bigger plan. And so we'll be talking about that this week. We're going to shoot a video just about this, our phased return plan, return to worship, so you guys get to hear about that. And we're going to be sending an email out and putting more communication on the website as well, so please look for that. So we're super excited. And today, we are jumping back into our series called Made Alive. And for the past few weeks, we've been looking at the work of the Holy Spirit and how that matures us in our faith and specifically the fruit of the Spirit. And so for the past few weeks, we've been talking about Spirit-produced love, Spirit-produced joy, Spirit-produced peace. And today, we're talking about Spirit-produced patience. And I think this is great timing for us because, especially to talk about patience, I just mentioned our return to worship, on-campus worship plan. We've been worshiping together at home, which has been amazing. God has been working through this time. The church has never been closed. And so I want to be very careful in the language that I use because God's been moving powerfully over these past couple of months that we've been worshiping together in homes all throughout our community. And so we're going to continue to provide streaming content for us to be able to worship in homes. But we're excited to get back on campus. Obviously, I know you guys have been looking forward to that, but it's a great time for us to talk about patience because I know that many of you have a lot of different feelings about this. You're on all ends of this from, we should have already been back together to, hey, we really need to make sure we're following some precautions and taking some steps before we just rush back in. And so I know you could be all over that spectrum. And so it could be a frustrating journey for you, maybe just having to wait. And so this is good timing for us because the reality is we live in a culture that has conditioned us to be impatient. And so it's important that we talk about Spirit-produced patience and what that looks like. Because I've talked about this before, but I just laugh at our society because we're so committed to not waiting. We hate waiting. We hate waiting in lines. We hate, we hate whether it's people or circumstances. We just hate waiting. And there's so many, I've joked about the fact that even our internet speeds, our download times, we get so frustrated at that. Far be it we wait for the signal to bounce back from space. Give it a second, let it upload. But we get so impatient. Or even our microwaves have buttons on it for popcorn, the popcorn button, because who has time to put all the numbers in there, right? Or the 2-minute button that you hit, because you don't want to push those extra zeros, right? It's crazy. And so we have technology just committed to make things faster. We don't even care if it's better. We just want it faster. And so it's so important that we look at God's design for us, that waiting has always been a part of the work of God. And there's times where he's working in our waiting, teaching us patience. It's a godly trait. It's a trait that the Spirit produces in us. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So I want to encourage you, if you have your Bibles with you, we're going to be in James chapter 5, or you can join us on the YouVersion app. Some of you are following along on there. The scripture's there as well. James chapter 5, verses 7 through 11. Let's look at this together. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and the late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You've heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you've seen the purposes of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. And so there's so much packed into this passage, and I love this when you think about the author. This is James, the earthly brother of Jesus. And I don't know if you ever think about that, but I think about that. I mean, imagine what growing up would have been like, why can't you be more like your brother? Well, he's perfect, Mom. Kind of a high standard to live up to, right? You talk about patience. But James is later became the leader of the church in Jerusalem, and here in the book of James, he's writing about all that God has taught him about patience, and he's given us some examples in this passage. And so there's 3 things that we're going to see today in this passage when it comes to Spirit-produced patience, and that's what it is, why it's so important, and how to get it. And so first, we want to talk about what it is and Spirit-produced patience. And I want to use a kind of a working definition for us as we talk through this together today. So Spirit-produced patience is responding to people and circumstances in a Christ-like way. Now, I came across another definition for patience, God-given restraint in the face of anxiety and oppression. And that works as well, but I chose this particular definition of responding to people and circumstances in a Christ-like way. I chose that because this passage actually shows us, it uses 2 different words and 2 different definitions of patience. And I never saw that before until I was studying this in preparation for today. And so I think we're going to see, let's look at the first few verses 7 through 9. And we're going to see how this shows us that patience is responding to difficult people with forgiveness and grace. So let's look at that. Starting at verse 7 again, just 7 through 9 this time. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until he receives the early and late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. And so the reason I wanted to read that again is because in this example, James shows us the patience of a farmer. And this was important because in those days for a Palestinian farmer, they really had 2 major factors when it came to planting and sowing of the crops. And there were really only 2 major rains that they were looking to. The first was the early rain in fall or autumn time frame, and then the second was the late rain, the late spring rain. And so the farmer couldn't plant before the early rain because the ground was just too hard. until that first rain, that early fall rain, it just wasn't, the conditions weren't optimal for the farmers to plant. So this one wasn't as strong a temptation or as much of a struggle in patience as the second rain, because it was one thing to plant the crop, but it was a whole other thing to reap the harvest of the crop. And so the farmer had to wait, because if you reaped the crop early, then it just wouldn't produce. It wouldn't yield as much. And so the farmers had to demonstrate incredible patience to wait on that spring rain. You notice in James described it as the late rain. And there's a reason he used that word, is because, it would come time where you really wanted to reap that harvest. You really wanted to get those crops, and that was livelihood for them. And so they had to wait on the timing. They had to wait on God's timing, because if they reaped early, they wouldn't get the benefit of that crop, producing the full crop. And so James is using that example. And the Greek word that's used there is the word macrothumia, which literally means long-suffering. That's the translation of the word for patience there. And basically that means it takes a lot to get you worked up. That's what long-suffering means. And it uses an example of a lack of patience. James uses the example of grumbling. Now, let me just be clear. Grumbling, is not a spiritual gift, although some of you wish it were, right? But it doesn't work that way. Grumbling is actually evidence of a lack of patience. And so that's what James is showing us here. And grumbling is how you respond to people, because he relates this directly to people. Don't grumble against one another. And grumbling is how you respond to people who are disappointing, frustrating, disillusioned, or disheartening. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes grumbling's on the outside, but more often than not, it's on the inside. People don't even see when you're doing it. You're just grumbling against people. You're responding negatively. Grumbling means that you've given up on people. And to be patient means to continue to care for people and pull for them and be on their side, to love them. And that's what being patient means. But grumbling means you've written them off. You don't have time to deal with them. You don't want to deal with them. You're not going to care for them. You're irritated and frustrated by them. And so it's a dangerous thing, because when it comes to a grudge, most of us know when we have a grudge against someone, right? That's a pretty strong word. That's really a form of hate, where someone's hurt us, or we have just, we can't be in the same room with them, or it's a form of impatience as well, but it's an extreme form of impatience, is a grudge, and we're often aware of that. The reason that impatience or grumbling is so dangerous is because it's more common, and it's more subtle, and we don't really even catch it or realize it. But it can grab a hold of our hearts, and just think about this. This is a good way to think about it. Think about someone you interact with, and when they come in the room, right? You may not do it. You may not do it on the outside, although some cases you may. But on the inside, as soon as you see them, as soon as they're around the corner, as soon as they come in the room, you're like, ugh, right? There's just this sigh on the inside, or you're kind of rolling your eyes. You're like, oh, you, him, her, I have to deal with them. I don't even have time for them right now. Okay, that's an example of grumbling. That's an example of someone that you've given up on, that you're impatient with because of circumstances, or because of people, and because of how they've behaved, or the history. There's a lot of factors, but it's impatience, and that's what we see. And so towards people, patience is when you experience frustration, you experience irritation, disappointment, that you respond to them, you respond to difficult people with grace and forgiveness. That's patience when it comes to people. So even when they're irritating, even when they're frustrating, you respond in a loving way through forgiveness and through grace. And so So that's not the only type of patience that James describes in this passage. So the first patience we see is with people. The second patience we're going to see is with circumstances. And we see this in verses 10 through 11 of chapter 7. And so let's look at that together. Verse 10, as an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remained steadfast. You've heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you've seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. And so in this, we see the second type of patience is a patience in circumstances. And James says, consider the prophets, and then he names Job. And he uses Job as an example. And Job wasn't so much struggling with patience with people as he was struggling with patience in life and ultimately with God because of his circumstances. It wasn't how he was being treated by others, it was how he was being treated by life. And so we see his response in that. He experienced impatience through suffering, through tragic circumstances. And in those, there was a disaster that wiped out all of his wealth, followed by another disaster that wiped out his children, and then a third disaster that took his health. So he lost his wealth, he lost his children, he lost his own health. And in the midst of that, he's crying out to God. And James is saying, consider this example as an example for patience. And we see not only is there a different Greek word, but there's actually a different English word that's used there, and it's the word steadfastness. And so it's describing endurance and perseverance. This is another side of patience that we see described here. And the Greek word that's used there is the word hypomone, which means to hyper stand in place. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but let me give you a visual of that so you can kind of understand that a little better. This understanding of patience, or this Greek word, hypomone, it would be an example of in a battle where a military commander would give you orders and say, I want you to hold this position. I want you to occupy this space and stand fast. So no matter what comes at you, no matter what the enemy throws at you, I don't want you to give any ground. Don't give an inch. Because if you move, if you give up any space, if you allow them, then all is going to be lost. Okay, that's kind of the idea that's conveyed here. To hyperstand. No matter how fiercely the enemy attacks, do not retreat. That's the picture there, is if you lose ground, everything's lost. And so we see both of those in this passage. One example, one aspect of patience is patience with people. So when dealing with difficult people, you respond with forgiveness and grace. And the other example is patience in circumstances. When you deal with difficult circumstances, overwhelming circumstances, tragic, things that when life all goes wrong, when things are disappointing and frustrating and overwhelming, patience is living how you ought to live and responding how you ought to, regardless of what's happening at the time. And so ultimately, patience in circumstances is dealing with difficult circumstances or responding to difficult circumstances with courage and trust. So that's the two types of patience: responding to difficult people with forgiveness and grace, and responding to difficult circumstances with courage and trust. And so this is a good place for us to pause and maybe just ask some questions with those around you to help understand this a little better. What are some things people do that drive you crazy? And how do you normally respond to them in those moments? And here's another one to get you thinking. What circumstances cause you to be impatient, like traffic, lines, unmet deadlines, etc.? And how do you demonstrate your impatience in those situations? So we talked about what it is, what patience is, both with people and with circumstances. But now we want to look at why it's so important, because James addresses that as well in this passage. And so impatience demonstrates a lack of trust in God. And this is huge because, I think for the most part, most people can admit that patience is a good thing. You can kind of get, from a practical standpoint, why being patient is better than being impatient, and impatience leads to bad decisions, or rushing things, or it can lead to bad things. I think most people can admit that. But ultimately, we're like, I hope to be a little bit more patient. But is it really that big a deal? Yes, it's a big deal, and that's what James shows us. In fact, listen to verse 9 again. James chapter 5, verse 9. It says, "Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door." So James is saying it's a big deal. Like, he brings us to judgment. He's telling there's condemnation that can come for this, apart from God intervening on our behalf. And so he's showing us how big a deal this is. And so you're still wrestling with why it's such a big deal, because every day you're going to face moments. You're going to face people and circumstances that are disappointing, that are overwhelming, that are infuriating, that are frustrating, that are not what you expected, and that's going to cause reactions in those moments. When that happens, it happens all the time, and sometimes it happens on the hour. You can face multiple situations throughout a day, and in every one of those situations, there's going to be a response. You're going to respond in your heart. Even if you don't respond externally, you're definitely going to be responding internally. And at every chance, you're going to have an opportunity to trust yourself or to trust God. And so what that means is, in those moments, you're invited. You have an opportunity to trust God's timing, to trust God's wisdom, to trust God's plans, or to trust yourself. Trust your timing, your wisdom, your plans over God. And so the challenge, and the reason this is such a big deal, is because in our impatience, when you really boil it down to trusting God, when you're saying impatience demonstrates a lack of trust in God. And basically what we're doing in those moments is, instead of following God, right, we're called to follow God, what you have is an inverted gospel, where we invite God to follow us. Like, thank you for rescuing me and for my salvation and for working in me, but I've got plans. I've got my agenda. And so God, I want you to join me in what I'm doing. And that's backwards. That's never what God intended. And so that's why that can be such a big thing. And, when you're trusting yourself, here's what it sounds like in your heart. Not again. Why is this happening right now? Or this is not what I had in mind. Or what are they thinking? What are they doing? These are the kinds of reactions that we have. We feel we know best. We say things like, I don't deserve this. Right? And that's us trusting ourselves. And when you're trusting in yourself, it always leads to anxiety. It leads to restlessness. It leads to resentment, and it leads to self-pity. And those things just feed off of each other. That's why it is so important to be patient. That's why Spirit-produced patience is so valuable in our life, because it's an opportunity for us to trust God. Every day you're being invited to trust. Listen to James chapter 5, verse 8. It says, "You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand." And so again, this is not on the outside, this is on the inside. You're being called to establish your hearts, to stand fast, to be patient, to trust in God's will, His plans, His timing, His wisdom above your own. That's what it means to be patient. And so when you talk to your heart that way, rather than going, not again, or I don't deserve this, or why is this happening, it sounds like this. God, you know better than what I need. You know better than I do what I need. God, your timing is perfect. I didn't ask for this. I wouldn't have chosen this, but I trust you in this. That's what patience looks like when it's worked out. Spirit-produced patience. That's what it sounds like. In fact, I love this quote from Elizabeth Elliot in her book, Through Gates of Splendor. She's talking about God, and she's talking about patience and suffering and enduring and holding fast. And this is what she says. God is God. And if he is God, he's worthy of my worship and my service. And I will find rest nowhere but in his will. And that will is infinitely, immeasurably, unspeakably beyond my largest notions of what he's up to. And you see that? Patience is rooted in humility, because a lack of patience demonstrates a lack of humility where we think we know better. But when you get a right perspective, you realize that God's ways are better. His ways are higher, but they're also better. He's for us. He loves us. And it's an opportunity for us to trust in that. When you speak to your heart like that, like Elizabeth Elliot did, when you speak to your heart by saying, God, your ways are so much better than mine, your ways are higher, then that's how you get calm. That's how you get rest. That's how you walk in peace. And it's remembering that God is working in our waiting. Waiting is not just having to wait until you get what you want. That's not waiting on the Lord. Waiting on the Lord is part of the process of God working in us, of us becoming who he created us to be. And that's why it's so important. And so take a minute, understanding why patience is so important. Take a minute and let's pause and ask some folks around you these questions. How has God used difficult people or circumstances to teach you or grow your faith? Share a time when waiting and demonstrating patience allowed you to experience something even better than if you had not waited. Like some examples, like saving for a big item or being told no, but then being given a better opportunity, things like that. Talk about that for a minute. So we've talked about what patience is, both with people and in circumstances. We've talked about why it's so important, but lastly, we want to talk about how to get it. And we learn patience by learning to trust God's timing and his plans. And as we saw in our last point, it's to establish our hearts because this is so important for us to see as we talk about how we get it. Our hearts are not neutral. They're not on our side, not naturally. Our hearts will naturally drift towards self-pity, toward thinking our ways are better, towards selfishness. And so we can become our own worst enemy. And so the challenge is, how do we develop patience in the midst of that? So when we have those moments to trust God or ourself, your heart is going to lean towards trusting itself unless there's an intervention. And this is how we can do that. We develop patience in the present by looking to the past and to the future. That's how we begin to develop patience. And so first, think about it this way. How did Job develop patience in suffering, or how did he develop endurance? First was by suffering. And I know that sounds kind of a duh statement, but think about this in our life. Although it'd be nice for us to develop patience in calm situations, that's not often where we're challenged to develop patience. We develop patience in suffering. When God wants to teach us to wait, he puts us in the waiting room. When he wants to teach us to be patient, and he puts us in situations where, I've said it this way before, sometimes our plans have to fail in order for God's plans to succeed, what he wants to do in us, what he wants to do through us. And so it's in those moments when our will is tested, when our timing is challenged, when our thoughts are changed. It's in those moments that we develop patience, that we learn to endure, that we learn to stand fast. And in those moments, you don't learn it by just saying, well, I'm not going to let anything get to me. That's hardening your heart, but that doesn't work. It might work a time or two, but it won't give you lasting endurance, and it won't teach you to be patient, just trying to harden your heart. That just means you don't care about anything. Look at how this works. We see how this plays out in Psalm 77. This isn't necessarily a popular psalm, but it absolutely gives us a picture of patience, of endurance, of steadfastness, of how this plays out in the midst of really challenging and hard circumstances. Look at this. Let's look at this together. Psalm 77, starting at verse 1 and reading to verse 20. I cry aloud to God, and he will hear me. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. In the night, my hand is stretched out with wearying. My soul refuses to be comforted. When I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. You hold my eyelids open. I'm so troubled that I cannot speak. Consider the days of old, the years of long ago. I said, let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart. Then my spirit made a diligent search. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Are his promises at an end for all time? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? And then I said, I'll appeal to this, to the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I'll remember your wonders of old. I'll ponder all your work and meditate on your mighty deeds. Your way, O God, is holy. What God is like our God? You're the God who works wonders. You've made known your might among the people. You, with your arm, redeemed your people, the children of Jacob and Joseph. When the waters saw you, O God, when the waters saw you, they were afraid. Indeed, the deep trembled. The clouds poured out water. The skies gave forth thunder. Your arrows flashed on every side. The crash of your thunder was in the whirlwind. Your lightnings lighted up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your way through the sea, your path was through the great waters, yet your footprints were unseen. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. And so in this psalm, the psalmist starts with all the problems going on. I mean, he's freaking out. Like this, he says, I'm so overwhelmed I can't even speak. And so these are incredibly difficult situations, circumstances. But then he says, I'll remember the Lord. I'll meditate on the Lord. He thinks about the Lord's character, about God's heart, about God's purposes, and about the past. And so by meditating on who Jesus is and what he's done, we have an endless source of patience. And that's what we see in Psalm 77. And so we find our patience in the present by looking to the past and looking to the future. And so we see, thinking about this for a minute, let's look in the past. When I say look to the past, look to the cross. Not just to Job, we talked about Job, but to the truly innocent sufferer, Jesus. And Job was only kind of innocent, and we often kind of skip that part of Job's story. We don't think about that, but he was better than most, and so you could say it this way: Job was living a better than average moral life, and yet he was experiencing a worse than average circumstances in his life. And so because of that, he had room to complain. This isn't fair. But think about Jesus. Jesus, because Job wasn't perfect, but Jesus is the only perfect sufferer. He's the only truly innocent sufferer. And when you think about Jesus, he loved the Lord his God with all his heart, with all his soul, with all his mind, with all his strength. He's the only one that perfectly did that, that perfectly loved the Father. And he deserved a great life. He truly deserved. He's the only one that truly deserved a great life, and yet he had a terrible life, at least by our standards. He was mistreated. He was poor. He was betrayed. He was rejected. He was arrested on trumped-up charges, and then he was tortured and killed and abandoned by his father. And when you think about this, through all of this, through all that agony and pain, he was patient. All the forces of evil came down on him, and he stood his ground. He endured, almost as if he knew that we were all behind him and that all would be lost if he didn't stand his ground. And in the midst of that, he declared, he obeyed. He spoke to his own heart. He said, "Not my will, but yours, God." And he established his heart. He went to the cross. That's patience. Jesus, through his perfect patience, atoned for our impatience. And so the Father could be patient with us. I mean, think about this. The Father never giving up on us, showing us grace and forgiveness despite our sin. He never gives up on us, even when we fail. And that's what we look to. And when we see Jesus, when we see Jesus, the truly suffering servant, the one who suffered on our behalf, the one who was patient, even in the midst of our impatience, when we look to him, that's when we find the strength to endure. And so ultimately, what we've learned today is patience means to respond to difficult people with grace and forgiveness, because we've been shown great grace and forgiveness. And it means to respond to difficult circumstances with courage and trust, because we have a God who's for us and who's working in our waiting. And so let's pause one last time and talk about this. And here's a couple questions to dig a little deeper. How can looking back on God's faithfulness in your life and studying about his character and his word help you to trust the wait? It's worth trusting him. It's worth living for him. That's what we're called to. And so to help us kind of bring that home, we just want to pause one last time and ask a couple questions with those around you. List traits of God's character from his word and how he's shown himself faithful in your life. How can you use this to help you trust him and his plans in your life? How can looking to the future and his triumphant return give you the courage and strength to stand and patiently endure whatever comes your way? Many say, I understand what you're saying about patience, but how can I trust God in the midst of suffering? And I love how Johnny Erickson Tata puts it. She's a quadriplegic from a diving accident and years ago. And through her experience, she learned to deeply trust God and his purposes for her life. And I love how she says this when it comes to trusting God. She says, Jesus is worth trusting, period. End of argument. After all, when they hang you on a cross like meat on a hook, you should have the final word on suffering. And I share that because God didn't, for us to understand the big picture, God didn't simply create a world and, make a plan for our lives. He entered into our world. He entered into the brokenness of our world, and he hung on a cross like meat on a hook so that we could be rescued and redeemed, so that we could have our hope and our purpose and a peace and a power in him alone. And when you understand that, it's not just looking to the past of the cross, it's looking to the future, that Jesus is coming again, that he's returning to make all things right. And so we can stand fast, we can endure, we can respond to difficult people with grace and forgiveness because we've been given great grace and forgiveness. We can respond to difficult circumstances with courage and trust because we know how it ends. And it ends with a glorious Savior ruling and reigning over a new heaven and a new earth, and us spending all eternity with him. That's how we live with patience. That's how the Spirit produces patience in us. And he is working in the midst of our waiting while we trust him. And so let's pray for that this morning as we continue in worship. Father, we thank you that you didn't leave us alone in a broken world and simply just make some arbitrary plans for our lives. No, you stepped into our broken world at great cost to yourself. Jesus, you patiently endured suffering and rejection, even though you were innocent. You did all of that so that we could have the hope and the peace that comes from you. That's how much you loved us, and that's how much you still love us. And so I pray that that love would transform us, that by remembering you, by meditating on you, by praying and seeking you and remembering what you've done for us and trusting that you are coming again. And in the meantime, you are working in us, creating us to be the people that you've called us to be. And so we are trusting in that. We're looking to you, and we can't wait till we're fully redeemed and in your presence. And we're praying all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
There is strength within the sorrow. There is beauty in our tears. You meet us in our mourning with a love that casts out fear. You are working in our waiting. You're sanctifying us when beyond our understanding. You're teaching us to trust. Your plans are still to prosper. You have not forgotten us. You're with us in the fire and the flood. Faithful forever, perfect in love. You are sovereign over us. You are wisdom unimagined. Who could understand your ways? Reigning high above the heavens, reaching down in endless grace. You're the lifter of the lowly, compassionate and kind. You surround and you uphold me. Your promises are my delight. Your plans are still to prosper. You have not forgotten us. You're with us in the fire and the flood. You're faithful forever and perfect in love. You are sovereign over us. Even what the enemy means for evil, you turn it for our good. You turn it for our good and for your glory. And even in the valley, you are faithful. You're working for our good. You're working for our good and for your glory. Even what the enemy means for evil, you turn it for our good. You turn it for our good and for your glory. And even in the valley, you are faithful. You're working for our good. You're working for our good and for your glory. Even what the enemy means for evil, you turn it for our good. You turn it for our good. perfect in love. You are sovereign over us.
Thank you so much for tuning in for worship today. We are so thankful that you joined with us, and we hope that you've been encouraged and inspired and challenged in your walk with Christ. Remember that we are working through a reading plan through the book of Acts, so we hope that you'll join us on YouVersion for that. And I look forward to seeing you Wednesday night, 6:30 to 7, as you come drive through the parking lot or the driveway of Discovery Park to show your support for our graduates and their families. Beyond that, hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you soon.